Hey everybody, welcome back to Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. Last week I had the very honorable role of being a special guest on the RCT3 launch livestream by Frontier Developments on Twitch. And yeah, it was really fun, I have to say, and I'm super honored to be there as somebody who has played this game for so many thousands of hours, and it just means a lot to me. But also, I was given a special task for that stream. Rather than just appear as a special guest and talk about the game, they wanted me to prepare something that I could show them. And, well, the original plan was just to record some simple gameplay footage, but I suggested that I just make some time-lapse of the usual kind that I do for videos and do some live commentary there on the stream. Now, obviously, that was just a one-time thing, so I asked them if I could use this time-lapse to make a video out of it as well, and they gave permission for that, so that's what you're looking at right now. Well, I got a challenge from them to work on something specific, so I didn't totally come up with what I'm doing here. I wanted to, for one, do everything no custom scenery, because, well, it's supposed to be a showcase of what you can do with Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, so I figured it would be a bit of false advertisement if it featured all kind of modded content. Even though, I do have to say, I've been looking into the modded content for Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 and getting all of my old mods and custom scenery to work, so maybe I'll do something with that. But for the live stream, I wanted to keep it completely vanilla. And also, I was asked to try and do something with a spooky theme. I'm actually still not entirely sure why, but I figured it would be a fun challenge anyway, so that's what we're going for. As I explained on the stream back then, my general inspiration for this build is Bran Castle in Romania, which is the real-life Dracula castle, which kinda sits on top of a hill in a mountainous region in Transylvania. It's really beautiful. Highly recommend going there if you're ever in Romania or just the general vicinity of it. And I figured it would be a really cool setting for a kind of spooky coaster, especially considering that I don't have that much experience with spooky themes in general, and especially in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 vanilla, it's not something I'm really great at, so I wanted to keep it simple and stick to things that I knew how to do. Now, the coaster type that I'm going for is, as you can see, a B&M inverted coaster, and of course it's a terrain coaster as well, because those things are just really fun. I was mostly inspired by Nemesis in a sense that the layout follows very similar elements, starting off with a corkscrew into a 0G roll right here, and finally ending up with a vertical loop. Of course, the only difference is that the actual direction of the layout is completely different. This one's a bit more exploratory rather than compact, and it has a whole a pre-lift section as well, which has a corkscrew and a few twists and turns, and I think it's always a nice thing to add to a layout, to have this kind of two-step layout where it's not just one part, but you really have a sort of intro to it as well. And altogether, I think it's a layout that also winds itself nicely around this central hill where the plan is to build the castle one day, which I do think is actually the highlight of this video, as much as I still enjoy trying to use this coaster builder to come up with creative layouts, because it's kind of a case of trying to overcome the limitations to see what you can do. I think the thing that I was most interested in building here was actually the castle on top of the hill. Also, during the live stream, I got some questions about what the deal is with my terraforming here and why I sort of made this checkerboard pattern on the other hills. And that's really just the old terrain method of doing the checkerboard grass pattern to mix the textures together and make sure you get a slightly different blend of rocky textures to kind of overcome the limitations in the in-game textures. Something that's worth noting, I think, is also that there was a way to get over these textures by modding it. There were old text mod sets made by somebody called Old Spice and later DJF, which were really cool and added some custom textures to the terrain, which kind of made this whole checkerboard pattern a bit more redundant. But even with the in-game textures, it just allows you to take existing grass or sand or rock textures and make them darker or lighter or more vibrant. It's just a really cool way that you can just create all of these different mixtures of texture sets. So the station here is actually kind of my proof of concept for what I wanted to do for the castle on top of the hill. Obviously, all of the scenery sets in the game are very limited, so I figured that the best way to go about doing scenery in the base game is to try and mix the sets and see which pieces of different sets go well together. I think the spooky castle walls and the adventure castle walls are similar enough to kind of use them interchangeably, because sometimes there's just a certain shape of wall, or especially these battlements, that work a bit better in the adventure set, but then I still wanted to feature all of the stones from the spooky castle walls as well, because those do look a bit more spooky and are a little bit more dark and brownish in texture. So mixing those two I think works really well. And then for the top part, I wanted to make this look like there's some timber work on the top floors. It is something that you see in a lot of those castles in Transylvania. And really the best option for the timber work that I could come up with is using the western sets to lay down the floors and ceilings and to add some dark trims and cornices to the buildings, and then using the bamboo sets to create this sort of illusion of white thatch walls with wooden framework on top of it, which honestly, it's not the best way to go about this thing, but I think it's the best that you have in the game, and especially from a distance, I think it looks convincing enough for this type of architecture. Another really positive thing I think is that the spooky wall set is without question the most flexible wall set in the game. It actually has all these little pieces like quarter corner roof pieces and quarter regular gable roof pieces, and you can place them on a quarter grid as well, which is super handy in this game. If you don't know much about this game, everything is on the grid, and a grid tile is 4 meters by 4 meters, and most wall and roof pieces conform to this as well, and I think the spooky set is a rare case where that's not the case, and you have these little pieces that are only 1/4 the size of the full grid, and you can place 4 different pieces within a tile, and this makes it a lot more flexible and means that you can build these roof shapes that the game doesn't originally come with. Another good thing about the set, I think, is that the roof is quite steep, and most of the roofs in the game are very gentle. Maybe go up 2 meters or 1 meter over the 4x4 section, and the spooky wall set at least has 45-degree angles on the roofs, so that's about as good as it gets in this game. And I think finally the corner piece is actually decent to build custom spires out of, so that's always nice. I think collisions especially are something to watch out for with this game as well, because you can't move different scenery pieces into one another, at least not until you've gone into the game code and changed the options manually, but that's something for another day as well if I ever get into some hardcore modding again. But yeah, you always have to come up with these tricks to try and work some pieces together without having to you know, make the pieces physically go into each other, because that's something you basically can't ever do. So for the castle itself, I'm using, well, more or less the same pieces as I was using for the station, except of course in a different setup here. And the trick to this castle is really just to create a general outline of a castle, put some towers around it, try and come up with a slightly different design for each of the towers, add some battlements to it and some general details here and there, and that's basically it. I think it's a very standard sort of approach to building a castle. The challenge here, for me at least, wasn't really to come up with what exactly the castle would look like, but really just how to make sure that I had enough variety and had the right shape given the pieces in the game, which are very limited. And even though this is the spooky castle wall set, I'm still mixing it, of course, with a bunch of other scenery from the game, so trying to make everything work together I think was one of the main challenges here. Also, I think another very positive thing about the spooky wall set is that it has these different variations of pieces. So you also have roof pieces with dormers on it, and you can place these dormers high on the roof or low on the roof. There are even some roof pieces that add some shingles that are slightly broken or scattered to create a kind of ruined texture. So that's really cool, honestly. There's a lot more variety in this than I remember there being. You'll have to keep in mind that for my entire Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 stint, I was basically playing the game completely with mods and never really touching the in-game scenery sets. So a lot of this stuff, ironically enough, is new to me, even though I've probably played this game more than 10,000 hours over the course of my life. But yeah, it is what it is, I guess. I think another thing that I sort of have my own strong opinion on, but I'm not sure how much I agree with, especially the still active Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 players, is that I think there's not much of a point of playing Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 for the heavily modded side of things, because Planet Coaster exists. If you want to build really realistic stuff and have a lot of flexibility, I think 9 out of 10 times Planet Coaster will just be the better game for that. It just looks better, it's a spiritual sequel to this game, and it's a lot more friendly on your computer as well, and it's less prone to crash and have huge loading times, etc. It's just better in almost every way. I think there are some niche cases though where Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 is still strong. I think one of these is fireworks. The game still has really cool fireworks simulations, and this awesome program where you can create your own fireworks, which still looks great. At nighttime, I think the lighting of the game still looks good enough for cases like that as well. The water in the game actually is really good for a 2004 game, I think, especially for a creative sandbox game. And there are just all these different rides that Planet Coaster doesn't have, and this game does feature. I know that I think I've talked about this either in the last video or during the live stream as well. I forget because I bring these kinds of things up all the time. But there are some cases of roller coasters that were built in real life only after they had already been a part of Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. And I think the most interesting case is the vertical spinning roller coaster, which is called the Dizzy something Twister roller coaster in the game. Not exactly sure, but it's since been built in Schwabenpark in Germany. There's a roller coaster called Wilde Hilde, which was built in 2018, and is the first real-life example of this coaster type that was already featured in this game from 2004. So honestly, that's kind of crazy. And I think there are a lot of cases like that. There's also the ball coaster, or the coaster ball in the game, which is basically the real-world Intamin Zack spin. Only the first Intamin Zack spin ever was built in 2005, and this game is again from 2004. So it definitely seems like the developers of this game not only went out of their way to add a lot of existing roller coaster and ride types in the world, but they also looked for what kind of prototypes were in development and weren't out yet. So I think that's super cool, and I think for that reason there are still some coaster types that you would have to play Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 for, because you don't find them in any other game yet. And I mean, I say yet because I kind of hope that these sorts of roller coasters will still be added, maybe in future games in the coaster simulation genre, but I think so far Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 is pretty unique in that it's the only 3D game that features so many rides and roller coasters. So I think that's still really worth playing for that reason as well. And finally, of course, I think there's just fun in the challenge of trying to work with what the game gives you instead of taking all of these modded scenery pieces that basically sometimes already build things for you. At least I've been enjoying trying to get back into these old scenery sets and seeing what you can make out of it. And there's always a cool sense of accomplishment from building something intricate and detailed from these pretty basic pieces. At least when compared to all of the custom scenery stuff. Anyway, to go back to the coaster that I'm building here, well, it's not really the coaster anymore. The castle is finished at this point, and one last thing that I wanted to add in was a small town at the foot of these hills, just to kind of give an idea of the sheer scale of the castle. This was a little bit inspired by the Romanian town of Brasov, which is very close to the real-life Dracula castle, and it's just a nice Romanian town with lots of red roof buildings and some Baroque-ish architecture, stuff like that. So very generally inspired by that, I decided to build this town, but of course it's not quite as detailed or exactly in the same style. Although, again, I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised with how flexible some of the roof pieces turned out to be. There's a set of Wild West roofs, which are recolorable and just have these nice wooden shingles that can be used for tile roofs, which I'm using here. And in this case, I made them orange because this orange red-ish tint is just a thing you see a lot in Romania. But it's something that I think can work for many different themes, and it's one of those versatile scenery sets that, even though the game doesn't feature that much scenery, and a lot of it might not be recolorable, I think you can still do a lot with some of the basic sets. So actually, I think the Western sets in this game are my favorites, because whenever you're building anything that's wooden or you need some recolorable roofs or stuff for, the Western set basically has all of the main pieces that you're looking for. I think also back in the day, especially in the early days of community creations of Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, Western themes were always the ones that were most well executed and most realistic looking. And I think it's a clear, well, example of just the in-game scenery sets working really well for what you need to do with them. To be fair, Western is also kind of a basic theme, but I think it works alright. Another fun thing that I think people tend to forget a lot when they're playing this game is that many of the scenery pieces aren't even in the building section. You have a lot of useful fences, for instance, that you can place in whatever locations you want, and there's also this terrain elements menu, where you can add big blocks of terrain, but you can also find some gates, some various steel and wooden gates and stuff like that, that you can place over coasters or use as custom supports or whatever you want. And these, I think, are some of the things that you don't find as much in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 builds, but that you can do a lot with. I think back in the days that I was getting into Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 seriously and getting into the real community of it, so sometime around 2009 or 2010, there were always players who were trying to make the most out of the in-game pieces and really playing in the vanilla or the NCS style, as some people called it, or no CS. And I think a particular example is Aloria, aka Steven, who's made a lot of indoor swimming pools and theme parks and things like that. And I remember watching a lot of their videos. That was honestly my childhood. I think there's also Moonkin for the win, of course, who made the box series, which I recently did a coaster inspired by in Planet Coaster. But the basic box was also done without any custom scenery, and I think a lot of these videos show that even though there was a super alive modding community for Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, there's always been this push by many people to also keep it vanilla and see what you can do with the base game. I also got a comment from somebody on my last video about Piece of Prestige, who is an old Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 player who always focused on doing stuff without custom scenery, and they were wondering if I knew his YouTube channel, which is kind of funny because I actually still talk to him on a somewhat regular basis. But yeah, highly recommend his videos too. If you're in 2020 and you want to live that 2010 life and go back into Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 builds, I recommend all of this stuff. Just Aloria, Moonkin for the win, Piece of Prestige. These are just some examples, but I think there's a lot out there. And I think even for Planet Coaster players, you can find a lot of inspiration in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 builds. That community was very small, but it was super passionate about theme parks, and I think even more than the Planet Coaster community, it was very focused on constructive criticism and trying to raise everybody up, in a sense that people were always helping each other get better at the game and discover tricks and tips and things like this. And I think inevitably the Planet Coaster community has lost some of that drive, in a sense that it's just a bigger group of people and it's a bit more casual and a bit more focused on fun, because not gonna lie, the Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 community was a bit dramatic at times and super passionate about this topic, but still it was really cool to see how people just got this communal spirit from this game and focused so much on trying to make everybody better at it. And I think as a result of that, there are some Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 builds which nowadays can even be great inspiration for Planet Coaster. They might not look that great graphically, but there's some really great thought behind it in all of the details and composition and layouts for theme parks and such. I can't really name anything off the top of my head that I think is a great straight example for Planet Coaster builds, but I know that personally I've always had a folder of builds by Leonidas, who you can find still on New Elements, and also has an old Photo Bucket account who has lots of really great Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 builds, and they're also just great YouTube videos. There's Armpatze, which is one of my favorite coasters ever built in the game. You can find on Mike Sheet's channel, who's still active in Planet Coaster and Planet Zoo, some really great coasters in RCT3 as well. And of course, I don't want to plug myself too much, but there's my old YouTube channel called Silverad Archive, where I have a lot of my old Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 stuff saved, as well as, of course, some videos on this channel, so I think there's a lot of stuff to go back for, and even if you already own Planet Coaster, or if you don't own Planet Coaster and you're still sticking with Rollercoaster Tycoon 3, there's been so much amazing content in this game that honestly I can just talk about for hours and just let my stream of consciousness go on about. Unfortunately, that's something I can't really do in this video, so I'm just gonna leave it here and share with you guys a quick cinematic clip and POV of this coaster. Hope you guys enjoyed this little off-the-cuff Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 video again. I'm sorry if it's not quite as in-depth or thought out as my videos usually are, but I figured after preparing all of this for the launch livestream, I didn't want to just leave it in the void and do nothing with it. So here you guys go. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one.